My pilot was designated pilot by virtue of the fact that he was in my upper class, 41F, and he outranked me by 5 weeks. He also had had one or two landings in the B-26, which I had not had at that time. So when I climbed into the plane with him in Sacramento to start for Alaska, I had had a total of 10 hours of observer and co-pilot time in the B-26. We took off. We went by way of Portland and from Portland over to Spokane, and then we were going to go up the inland route, which, as you know, is roughly the route of the Alcan Highway now, by Edmonton, Whitehorse, on into Fairbanks, and then Elmendorf Field at Anchorage, Alaska. We were to take off on the 16th of January for the 1,000-mile hop from Edmonton to Whitehorse, Yukon Territory. This was in January, and of course the number of daylight hours we had was very few compared to what would be later on in the summertime. As we prepared for our flight, the night before, we were gathered in a room at one of the hotels there in Edmonton, and we were told that we did not have aeronautical maps to help us out from Edmonton north. But we were told that we had a couple of bush pilots there to be with us and to advise us on the 1,000-mile trip. These bush pilots gave to us pencil sketches on 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper. Up in the upper left-hand corner is Whitehorse, in the lower right-hand corner was Edmonton, 1,000 miles in between. A couple of rivers were drawn on the map, a couple of lakes, and they said you can't miss it. We took them at their word. Of course, when we actually got into the flight, we found out there were literally hundreds and thousands of lakes and literally hundreds and some very large rivers. Everything went well, even though we got a late start, roughly about 11 o'clock that morning, because we had to wait about 3 hours for the weather report to come through from Whitehorse by telegraph. As we approached the Watson Lake era, after we had gone past Port Nelson, British Columbia, and we're approaching Watson Lake, which is the southern part of Yukon Territory, we ran into darkness because we had lost some time in takeoff. We ran into snow, sleet, and we were getting low on gas. After searching around, trying to find where we were, it soon became evident that we were extremely lost. We had each of our 3 ships in our particular formation. We each had navigators. But the navigators were handicapped because when we got into the bad weather, they couldn't, of course, take a sunline with their sextant. So when we lost contact with the ground, except just by occasional glimpses of it, and with the bad weather, it was decided by the pilots of the flight to crash land the 3 ships in a high, shallow valley, roughly about 5,000 feet above sea level, in the foothills of the Canadian Rockies. The first 2 ships went in on their bellies and came out with no injuries whatsoever. As we came in our ship, the pilot asked for the wheels to be put down for the purpose of slowing the plane down. And as you well know, the B-26, particularly the original ones, landed at a very high rate of speed, 140, 45 miles an hour. I put the wheels down. We hit the ground, and what had appeared to us to be about tufts of grass 5 or 6 inches above the snow, we thought perhaps maybe we were landing on hardpan. Those 4 or 5, 6 inches of so-called tufts of grass turned out to be tops of bushes about 4 or 5 feet tall, and the rest were enshrouded, of course, in the snow. We hit the snow and crashed. The plane went up on its nose and crashed. The entire cockpit area opened. The pilot went out through the windshield, landed about 15 feet in front of the plane. I was knocked out in the seat itself. We were brought to, and again, the cold weather helped us in this particular case. We were sheltered under the wing by the rest of the crew who had come through safely, and through typical Yankee ingenuity, they had taken the wing covers we were carrying with us, and they formed a shelter over one of the wings, and so we were in that shelter well out of the weather. Sitting in our and laying in our shelter on the wing, we heard this low droning sound over the southern horizon. We looked out, and there, going from left to right, we saw the C-47, one big dot, and about 4 or 5 small dots, the P-40s, being shepherded by the C-47 onto Watson Lake, which was over west of us. At that time, again, our crews on all 3 ships had, with smartness and cleverness, had put a lot of shells into our tracer shells into our turrets, one after another. We had also some flares. So when we heard and saw those little dots along the horizon, all the crews that go with this 4th of July display of fireworks, and pretty soon we saw those ships gradually turn toward us, and they flew over us. And of course, we were extremely happy because they knew even though while we were still lost, they knew where we were. The next day, we found that 2 bush pilots flew in on a 1929 model high-wing, single-engine Fokker airplane on skis with a Royal Canadian Mounted Policeman. The constable came to our plane to find out if there was any injured. They took the pilot, and myself out. There were no injuries to the rest of our crew or the other 2 crews. They flew the 2 of us to Watson Lake and then to the hospital in Fairbanks, Alaska, at Ladfield, where we were there for a couple of days. I was discharged from the hospital there very shortly thereafter and returned to flying the first week in February of 1942.